We all go through life accepting what textbooks told us about the universe. But what happens when questions are raised about many of our fundamental beliefs? A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you've never imagined possible. Encounters with the Unexplained.
One of the most intriguing and one of the most enduring stories of unexplained encounters is the one universally referred to as the Roswell incident.
Roswell, New Mexico, a typical small town on the edge of a western desert until July 2nd, 1947. On that night, witnesses claim to have heard strange sounds and believe there was a flying saucer crash. The military took control of the area immediately, but at a press conference, they insisted it was just a weather balloon. But was the weather balloon story just an attempt to cover up the crash of some kind of unidentified alien craft? Was this a victim of the crash at Roswell, or just an elaborate hoax? What did a regular, down-to-earth cattle rancher encounter on his land that would catapult him into the world's spotlight? And why, to this day, have the events of that night remained unexplained?
Did a flying saucer, some kind of unearthly spacecraft, crash near Roswell, New Mexico, early in 1947? For over 50 years, investigators have been unable to even come close to agreement on what really took place there. Has the U.S. government recovered it and kept it hidden all these years? And what of the occupants, if any? What happened to them? Does the American government really know what fell from the sky that night? And if they do, will they admit it? And why, after more than 50 years, do UFO researchers still insist it's crucial that we learn the truth?
Roswell, as a mythic story, started in the mid-1970s. It didn't actually happen in the 1940s.
Roswell doesn't fit the standard flying disc reports because there was something on the ground, it had crashed, there was wreckage, and as we found out much later, there were bodies. The advocates and the opponents both have ignored almost all the relevant data which is obtained by talking to the right witnesses, looking up the records in the newspapers, following the story around the country. It was a major event in man's history.
Kevin Randall has devoted years of his life in an attempt to discover the truth and has written several exhaustive studies on the events at Roswell. As an enduring mystery should, it all began on a dark and stormy night in the summer of 1947.
The story that's been told is that Mac Brazel was alone at the ranch in early July 1947 during a thunderstorm. Heard a clap of thunder that sounded much louder, different than the normal claps of thunder. Didn't think too much of it that night. The next day he was out on the range looking to see which fields had gotten the rain the night before because he was going to move the livestock, and as he explored the fields he came to an area that was filled with metallic debris.
Captain Randall and many others have said that the pieces of debris that Mac Brazel discovered were like nothing else on Earth. Mac Brazel then decided to bring the matter to the attention of the authorities. So he left the ranch and drove the few miles into the nearest town, Roswell, New Mexico. The sheriff of Roswell at the time was George Wilcox. His granddaughter, Barbara Duggar, recalls the story.
In the 40s, there was a spacecraft, a flying saucer is what Big Mom called it, crashed outside of Roswell. My grandmother stated that my grandfather went out there to the site. And when he got out there, there was a big burned area when they first approached the area. And then they saw debris. He saw debris. I don't know if he was alone. She was not with him. He went by himself. I asked her, I said, you know, out of jokingness, did he see any little space beings? You know? And she said yes, there was 4 of them.
The sheriff, according to reports, immediately got in touch with the nearby Army Air Base about the field of strange debris. And it was only a short time before officers were on the scene, eager to see what the sheriff was talking about. After all, a field full of debris is one thing, but actual beings from outer space were quite another. What happened next appears to have been either the biggest mistake or the biggest cover-up in the history of the Air Force.
Major Jesse A. Marcel, the Air Intelligence Officer of the 509th Bomb Group, was told by Colonel Blanchard to go out and take a look at the scene himself. Marcel got out there, again, saw an area that he described himself as 3/4 of a mile long, 200 to 300 feet wide, filled with metallic debris. He showed it to Colonel William Blanchard, the commander of the 509th Bomb Group. Blanchard ordered a press release saying that the Army had captured a flying saucer, talked to Lieutenant Walter Hott. Hott issued the press release, wrote the press release, and took it to the various media outlets in Roswell, the 2 radio stations, the 2 newspapers, and from that point it went over the wire.
The release read, in part, "The many rumors regarding the flying discs became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers." But there was no mention of the space beings the sheriff told his family he had seen. Was this the beginning of a giant hoax or a giant cover-up? Barbara Duggar's grandmother was still afraid of repercussions 40 years after the event.
She said, the reason I'm telling you this is because when the incident happened, the military police came to the courthouse, to the jailhouse, and told George and I that if we ever told anything about this incident, talked about it in any way, that not only we would be killed, but the family, that they would get the rest of the family.
But if the Air Force had already admitted publicly that they had in their possession a flying saucer, why threaten a local official and his family if they didn't keep silent?
Having been to 19 archives, I'm not surprised that we haven't found much in the way of file data on Roswell. The government knows how to cover things up. The Eisenhower Library still has 100,000 pages of classified material, all of it older than 1960. You don't get to see top secret code word documents when you go to archives. Very little has been released. If we're lucky, sometime in this century, we'll find out more.
Things soon began to take a different turn. What started out as a simple act of civic responsibility by a local rancher had suddenly become a major military activity. Mac Brazel never said he had seen a downed aircraft. Could it be that the Army discovered something he hadn't seen? And what of witnesses to the whole affair that are still living? What do they have to say today? As headquarters for the 509th Bomber Group, the only bomber group in the world capable of delivering atomic weapons, Roswell, New Mexico citizens were no strangers to terms like secrecy and classified. During the long days of World War II, they had become accustomed to the military's obsession with secrecy, but things were beginning to seem a bit extreme, even to these folks. According to Bill Brazel, Mac's son, his father was also sworn to secrecy. But secrecy about what? Had Mac Brazel found something more than just a field littered with strange debris?
This is basically the point where the Roswell incident becomes a whole series of different mysteries, and they kind of crisscross one another. Because if Colonel Blanchard admitted they had a more or less intact flying saucer, then clearly somewhere they had more than just the small bits of metallic debris reported by Mac Brazel.
According to many who were in Roswell at the time, the result of all the activity was a flood of attention focused on this small New Mexico town. But what happened next only added to the confusion.
3 hours later, the official story changes. General Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force at Fort Worth, the parent unit to the 509th Bomb Group, now said it was nothing more than a meteorological balloon with a fairly common radar reflector attached to it. According to General Ramey, the balloon had crashed on the ranch. That's what Major Marcel found. He had overreacted thinking that he had a flying saucer. It was just this weather balloon and the Raywin target reflector.
Could it be that this photograph was a total fabrication? Here's what the officer on the right, General Thomas DuBose, had to say about the Army Air Force press release claiming the crash was just a weather balloon.
We knew that it was a cover story, and whose idea it was, I haven't the vaguest idea, but we used that in order to assuage the curiosity of the press.
Why would representatives of the U.S. military announce that the debris was from a weather balloon if their senior officers knew otherwise? As it turns out, the officers weren't the only ones to see the debris in General Ramey's office. Encounters researchers recently uncovered a civilian photographer who not only saw the debris Major Marcel brought in, he actually photographed it.
On July the 8th, 1947, I was a reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I was also a backup photographer there. On that afternoon, my city editor came over and said, go out to General Ramey's office. They're bringing in a flying saucer from Roswell, and we need shots of it, and hurry because we're right on the East Coast deadline. So I hurried out to General Ramey's office, and when I arrived there, the general was not there, but was expected back momentarily. That gave me an opportunity to arrange some of the debris that I saw there on the floor and to try to make the best of a picture. I remember that it was a pretty smelly, burned odor, and it was not very photogenic at all. So in my frustration, I was trying to pose something that would make sense, and about that time the general came back in. He came immediately over and bent over and started to examine the material. And as we look at the photographs now, we see several packages of unopened material, so it had not all been laid out at that time. When the general started to examine it, I asked him, what is this, General? He shrugged his shoulders and said, damned if I know, and went ahead very intently and looking at the material. While I was taking his picture, he had a piece of paper in his hand that he kept shuffling about, and in the different pictures, he was moving this paper around his hand. And finally, in the last picture, he was actually reading the message that he had in his hand. From that moment, from the time I left, I was the only person there, only civilian there, the only photographer or media person there. And but from that moment on, that material has not been seen by anyone, and it's been locked up somewhere ever since. Why do I think that the scene changed drastically and the attitude changed? I think it was the message that the general was given just as he walked into that room that changed the whole picture at that moment. After 2 years of study, the Roswell Photo Interpretation Team, called RIPIT, has come up with some interesting observations based on the Ramey message. First of all, it mentions victims of the wreck forwarded to Fort Worth. Secondly, it talks about the recovery of the Roswell disk. Third, what is needed at the Roswell site. And then finally, it talks about explaining it as a weather balloon.
Maybe Mac Brazel did find a balloon, but the problem with this is it never explains all the other testimony. It does not explain all the debris.
The Roswell event and everything about it is incredibly complex, and without the kind of detailed and painstaking analysis that I've done over the past 8 years, it's virtually impossible to understand. But after all this research, I am firmly convinced that the Roswell mystery, so-called, has been solved, and it had nothing whatever to do with the crash of an extraterrestrial spacecraft or its recovery by the military.
Was the mystery at long last solved? Well, not quite yet. Another book, The Day After Roswell, was published in 1997. Its author, Colonel Phillip Corso, takes a completely different view. Corso worked in the Pentagon for Army intelligence for a number of years and was National Security Advisor during the Eisenhower administration. He is the most credible witness to come forward.
There's something up there flying around that's beyond our technical capability. We have nothing that can go 3,000-4,000 miles an hour and break the lock that quick on a radar.
Jesse Marcel Jr., son of the intelligence officer who first examined the debris field, has come forth with an amazing story having to do with that debris that he remembers from his childhood.
Major Marcel brought some of the material home so they could show it to his wife and his son. Then later on he took all of that material back to the Roswell Army Airfield.
He picked it up off the mountainside.
The thing that set this apart from anything that I'd ever seen before or since was the markings on parts of the wreckage. In the I-beam structural members, there was like a writing of sorts. I remember at the time thinking this was like hieroglyphic, but it wasn't really hieroglyphic, but it was more of geometrical forms and symbols.
These markings drew attention of a number of Roswell investigators, and an effort was launched with mixed results. One Native American source translated the glyphs to say, "Female warriors are ready and prepared." Another attempt at translation from a Mediterranean source claimed that the characters were a form of ancient Greek. The English translation, according to this source, was freedom. A word fragment is hardly enough to base any conclusions on, but the questions raised by just the idea that they are words boggles the mind. And why or how would an alien culture use the ancient Greek letters in the construction of their craft? Could this mean that there is literally a universal language?
Roswell was a focal point in man's history because southeastern New Mexico was where we were testing atomic bombs. We tested one here, the first one, where we were firing German V-2 rockets, where we had our best radar. Any visiting alien would recognize that here was the technology that would take Earthlings into outer space. It was certainly worth looking at. They had an accident.
Still, the weather balloon explanation was very nearly the end of what we know today as the Roswell incident, but there were about to be even more startling discoveries. One of the things that keeps the Roswell story alive even today is the story told by this man, Grady Barnett, a civil engineer living in Roswell at the time. Grady Barnett told his friend Vern Maltese what he saw that July afternoon.
Mr. Barnett told me that when he was coming back on one of his field trips, he'd run onto a flying saucer that had burst open, and there were 4 beings on the ground.
4 alien beings, as well as an almost intact spacecraft. The number of beings coincides exactly with what Sheriff George Wilcox said he found. Civil engineer Grady Barnett claimed to have seen a crashed flying saucer and the dead occupants of that craft. Could this be the same craft the Army Air Force later claimed to have in its possession? But if Grady Barnett's flying saucer was almost entirely intact, what could account for the massive amount of debris discovered by Mac Brazel? And there was something else. Barnett said all the beings he saw were dead. Sheriff Wilcox told a slightly different story.
And Granddaddy said their heads were large, and the little suit that they had on was just, you couldn't, it was just like silk or something. And I asked her, I said, were the little men alive? Were they dead? And she said, I think one of them was alive.
Some theorists have suggested that there were 2 flying saucers rather than just one, each carrying a crew of 4. Some UFO researchers believe that this is the only explanation. By all accounts, the debris was all very small. If these were pieces of a craft of some kind, it must have been totally obliterated.
Based on first-hand accounts of other people who were involved, it's clear that the solution to the mystery was going to be found miles away from the Brazel Ranch, much closer to Roswell. Since the vessel was made of such super strong material, whatever destroyed it must have been a tremendous force.
And what about the material found at the Mac Brazel Ranch? Some who claim to have handled the debris say it was clearly something they had never seen before.
The material discovered at the debris field defied all attempts of the people to explain what it was. The foil could not be cut, the wood-like material couldn't be whittled, it couldn't be burned. So clearly we have material that is not like anything that was available in our society in 1947.
Is it possible that the pieces of debris found on the ranch were really quite natural? For example, could they have come from a meteorite?
Well, a meteor would enter the Earth's atmosphere at, of course, very high speed, and once it meets the resistance of the Earth's atmosphere, it begins to burn up and lose, of course, its size. And what's more, a meteor that landed with an audible impact would have left a gigantic impact crater, such as the one in Arizona.
Whatever struck the ground in New Mexico left no crater. Did create a gouge in the terrain, but that's more suggestive of some kind of a controlled crash than something falling out of the sky.
But something apparently did fall out of the sky that night. A meteor seems an unlikely explanation, and UFO investigators are unwilling to accept the weather balloon scenario. Are there other possibilities? Has the Air Force offered any other explanations? If a craft of some kind was recovered over 50 years ago, have we learned anything from the technology that it brought here? What Mac Brazel, Sheriff Wilcox, Jesse Marcel, and the entire U.S. Army Air Force encountered that night near Roswell, New Mexico, put this small town in an international spotlight. That was not something the government liked particularly, since Roswell Army Airfield was home to the world's only bomber group capable of delivering atomic weapons. That fact has led some to suggest the wreckage might have been from some super-secret spy plane. During the late 1940s, the former Soviet Union was very curious about American nuclear bomb experiments, which were conducted only 100 miles from Roswell. A spy plane trying to capture these secrets would logically fly to that part of the country.
The Soviet Union had nothing of the kind in 1947. In fact, using Freedom of Information, we checked to see if any Soviet aircraft had penetrated the coastal defense zones in 1947. Absolutely no evidence of any Soviet attempts to fly any kind of aircraft inside the United States in that time frame.
But UFO researchers have recently discovered that the Soviet Union did have an interest in Roswell. George Knapp took his investigative reporter skills to the former Soviet Union, where he discovered that the Russians had a very high level of interest in the events surrounding Roswell in 1947, and they came to some startling conclusions.
We met a scientist while we were in Russia who worked under a guy named Sergei Korolev, who's the father of Russian rocketry. And Korolev had told this doctor about his meeting with Joseph Stalin in the late 1940s. Stalin had an intense interest in UFOs, and one of the things he wanted to know about was Roswell. At the time, the late 40s, Roswell, New Mexico, was a hotbed of Russian espionage activity because we had so many secret military programs there. So they heard about Roswell, and they were curious about it. And he had his scientists and his spies study it, and the conclusion they came up with was that Roswell was real, that something really did crash there, that it wasn't a weather balloon, and it wasn't anything of earthly origin. They didn't know exactly where it came from, but they knew it wasn't ours and it wasn't theirs, and this was something that was of monumental importance that needed to be studied.
There's no question that scientists and others in the Soviet Union have been interested in gathering information about flying saucers. What we don't know is what is in the secret boxes, so to speak, just as we don't know what the U.S. government has. I suspect because we've spent so much money on spy satellites and other such systems that we probably have better data than they do because we tried to avoid shooting down vehicles. Russians supposedly tried to keep shooting them down to get something to learn from. That didn't go over well with the aliens, as I hear the story. So I think they have plenty of data. We won't get access to that any more than we Americans have access to American data.
Still, at the center of this story was the man who had, in essence, started it all, Mac Brazel.
What's going on here?
Brazel, we are told, was a virtual prisoner of the military at the ranch. If this is true, then it would seem the Army feared that he might tell others the truth about what he had seen. Then, another unexpected development in the Roswell incident. The story now took a remarkable turn. Investigators claim Mac Brazel escaped from the Army and headed straight for the people he knew he could trust.
This way.
His friends at radio station KGFL in Roswell would later tell how they hid Brazel in one of their houses.
We offered him a place to stay that night so he could get away from a lot of people with questions.
The plan had been to broadcast an interview with Mac Brazel, But Judd Roberts tells us that he'd gotten a number of phone calls from Washington, D.C. that prevented them from broadcasting the interview.
The suggestion was made to us that if we wanted to keep our license, we would not use the interview on the air, because that would give us about 24 hours to find something else to do beside the radio business.
It was only a weather balloon. Could it really be true that the Army would use coercive tactics to ensure Mac Brazel's silence? If so, silence about what?
Once Brazel was in the hands of the military police, he was kept at the guest house on the base under armed guard. Not exactly jail, but close enough. On the evening of July 9th, the military took Mac Brazel to the various media outlets in Roswell, and here he was telling them a story that differed significantly than what he had told them on July 6th.
What I found yesterday in my field was a weather balloon.
What happened to Mac Brazel during the time he was in custody? Why did he change his story? Could it be that Mac Brazel planned to reveal the same story later told by mortician Glenn Dennis?
In 1947, Glenn Dennis worked at the Ballard Funeral Home. In small towns, often the hearse doubled as an ambulance, and Glenn Dennis would have an opportunity to drive injured airmen back out to the base. Once he arrived at the hospital and escorted the airmen into the emergency room, he had an opportunity to see some of the metallic debris that had been collected on the debris field in the back of ambulances as he walked by them.
Excuse me, sir, this is private property.
I said, "It looks like you've had a crash." I said, "I see some debris, and then the ambulance is there," and that's probably where I really got in trouble right there.
Hey, what have you got there, Mom? What do you mean? Look, I just want to know what you've got right there. You say one word to anybody, and you're dead.
Glenn was told in very blunt language that if he ever talked about this, if he went into town and told his friends about it, he'd be killed.
But Glenn Dennis's connection to the Roswell incident did not end there. He would soon learn much more from his girlfriend, a nurse at the base hospital.
And this was a young second lieutenant, a very deeply religious lady. She was born and raised in a very strict Catholic family. She was going into this examination room that was across the hall. She was going in to get some supplies, and when she walked in the door, there was two doctors there. She started out the door and said, "You stay here, we've got to have you." And what it was, they were examining, she told me, 3 bodies, foreign bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. She said, "I've got to go back to the barracks." He said, "I am deathly ill and I've got to go back to the barracks." And then that was the last time I ever saw her. The next day, I called out. I wanted to see how she was doing and how she was feeling, and they said that she'd been transferred out. And they didn't know where, but she was no longer there at the air base.
What do you mean she's not available? Miss, excuse me?
What happened to the nurse that was pressed into duty on that fateful July day? More importantly, what did she see? Is there any evidence to suggest actual bodies were found? Did anyone else actually see what the doctors saw? If they did, would they ever come forward in spite of the threats? In July of 1997, people from all over the world beat a path to Roswell, New Mexico. The town's population virtually doubled overnight to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of what many believe to be the Roswell crash. Coincidentally, perhaps, July 1997 was also the time the United States Air Force chose to issue something called the Roswell Report, case closed. The Air Force may consider the case closed, but to many UFO investigators, the report simply added fuel to the controversial fire.
The press was ready when the Roswell story broke. Wow, we have something. Air Force issued instructions to cover it up. General Ramey said it was just a radar reflector from a weather balloon. So in less than a day, the story fizzled entirely until I got involved 30 years later. When finally those stories came out, it was clear that the Air Force explanation did not address bodies, didn't say anything about them. So they came up with crash test dummies, which were indeed dropped in New Mexico. But 6 years later, And all the dummies were 6 feet tall and 175 pounds to simulate pilots. All the alien reports were of beings shorter than 4.5 feet. They must think we're all dummies.
But beyond the hearsay evidence, is there any proof that creatures of some kind were aboard the craft? This highly controversial piece of film was supposedly shot by a military cameraman in 1947 during an autopsy of one of the alien beings. Could this be the body of a being from another world? Hotly debated since the film was first released in 1995. There were opinions aplenty on both sides, but nothing to corroborate what the film seemed to portray until this man came forward, retired Air Force Colonel Phillip Corso, adjunct to General Trudeau, and a former intelligence officer with every clearance the Pentagon gives. For many years, investigators have wondered at the seemingly sudden burst of technology that exploded on the American industrial scene in the mid-20th century. Lightweight night vision, integrated computer circuits, fiber optics, and the whole range of technology necessary to put a man on the moon. Could this technological jumpstart have had something to do with the Roswell crash? According to his book, The Day After Roswell, Colonel Corso himself was the man responsible for seeding alien technology into American industry.
And it was a bunch of wires, which I didn't even know what they were, which were emitting colors. I didn't even know if they were wires. I had this chip, this integrated circuit, a laser instrument that could do like some of the fine cuttings that they said in animal mutilations. And I had also fiber optics. I wasn't sure what the chip was. Integrated circuit in those days, a little beyond me. So I started talking to people and I figured, well, geez, this must be important. So that went, the write-up I made went to Bell Lab.
Having worked in industry on advanced research and development programs for a lot of years under security, I think we may have learned a great deal from flying saucers, but I don't think that that explains the enormous upsurge of new technology. If you gave Christopher Columbus a nuclear submarine, he could not have built another one. If aliens are 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 years ahead of us, we're not going to be easily able to duplicate their technology.
But Colonel Corso's credentials were impeccable, so much so that it wasn't until after his death that critics came forward to challenge his book. Yet, as astonishing as his revelations regarding technology were, it was his assertions about Roswell 50 years after the fact that put the crash, recovery of bodies, and the autopsy film in a whole new light.
I learned about the Roswell crash when I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas. And I was the duty officer that night. And that meant I was in charge of the security of the whole area, including the inspection of the guards, every place where they were. So I went around about 2 or 3 in the morning to the veterinarian area, because we had horses at Fort Riley. And one of the sergeants that I knew was a sergeant of the guard. I used to bowl with him. And I told him, Sergeant, how's everything going? They told me at headquarters that this area was very secure. He said, yes, come on, Colonel. He said, I want to show you something. So he took me back in the back room, and there was 5 crates. They looked like crates there. Lifted up a tarpaulin on one, I did, and here's this body there. And it was filling in fluid. And then I took a good look at it, and this lasted about 10 or 15 seconds only. At first I thought it was maybe a child, because it was only about 5 feet. And I figured, what is that?
The colonel reported that the sight of the thing gave him the same queasy feeling in the pit of his stomach as seeing men killed in combat, but he was able to describe what he saw in some detail.
The chest was small, sort of, and the skin looked sort of grayish color. And then the head was large for the proportion of the body. Not real big now, but large. And the eyes were both slanted, sort of. And they had about a half a filament on them.
Here was a man, deep in the intelligence community, actually admitting that not only did the military have alien bodies, but that he had seen them. But it would be 14 years before the significance of what he had seen would be impressed upon him. His most shocking revelations were yet to come.
And I had the reports on autopsy that's performed at Walter Reed on our lab, which we financed at Walter Reed. And when I read that, it matched with what I saw at Fort Riley 14 years before. The whole autopsy was similar to what I'd seen.
If the colonel is to be believed, not only were these strange beings autopsied in Roswell, but at Walter Reed Army Hospital as well. But what about that highly controversial autopsy film? Could the colonel shed any light on its authenticity?
Well, there was some truth to that, because they pulled out an eyelid, and no one knew about that eyelid. That eyelid was a light gatherer so they could see in the dark. They had it in a sort of a container, and the brain was in there. And it looked like the one that was described in these documents I had.
Could it be that Colonel Corso has at last given us the clues we need to confirm what actually happened as a result of the Roswell incident?
Regardless of what any of us may believe about Roswell, I don't think that there's any disagreement at all that it's important to document the truth wherever possible. Unfortunately, Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, does not document the truth. It's a collection of misstatements, lies, and fantasy. And quite simply, it's nothing but a hoax.
Nothing about Roswell, it seems, can go unchallenged. But if this is the real solution to the Roswell mystery at last, it unfortunately only raises other equally disturbing questions. If there were two saucers, or only one that broke into pieces, where are all those pieces now? And if the alien pilots really were taken away from the crash site, what became of them? Sappho Henderson was married to an Army Air Force pilot flying out of Roswell at the time who shared his secret with her.
And he said, well, I guess now that they're putting in the paper, I can tell you about this. I've wanted to tell you for years. He said, I want you to read this article because it's a true story. And I not only know that it's true, but I'm the pilot who flew the wreckage of the UFO to Dayton, Ohio.
There was one man, Pappy Henderson, a pilot at the base, a noted pilot, who had told a colleague, a dentist, with whom he shared a great interest in materials, that he had a piece of the wreckage. He showed it to him, took it back, unfortunately. Some other people connected with Pappy saw that piece as well. If one person had a sample of wreckage, others did, and that's what we're looking for today.
Was undeniable proof of extraterrestrial life carefully transported to Dayton, Ohio? Is the incident at Roswell really a closed case, as the Air Force suggests? Has all the controversy and investigation produced any conclusions at all?
So we came to the conclusion these creatures, whatever they are made to travel in space. And then gradually, through what the work we did, we found out that this integrated with the flying saucer, and really, because most of the failures in making flying saucers were the guidance system, that this creature was also the guidance system, was part of the engine.
These are supposedly control panels from the alien craft. Are these indentations in the shape of the alien hands the means by which the beings connected to the craft and became part of the engine?
We know enough about what happened to realize the government collected everything. They policed the area, they gathered the craft, they gathered the bodies. They picked up everything. Best evidence is that the spacecraft and the bodies were collected in Hangar 84 at the Roswell Army Airfield, and that they were then sent to other bases around the country. We know, based on, again, good testimony, that a preliminary autopsy was held at the base hospital. The nurse that Glenn Dennis knew said that she saw 3 bodies inside the base hospital. So we know 3 of them were at the hospital at one time. What we have are a large number of people, many of whom are unknown to one another, telling the same basic story from different points of view, from Mac Brazel on the debris field to the men such as Major Edwin Easley, who was on the impact site, telling a story that dovetails nicely. If it was a hoax, we would not have the corroborative testimony that has been offered by these people.
Could it be that there is finally a chink in the armor of silence that has protected the weather balloon story all these years?
53 years later, and having the benefit of quite a bit of examination, I now believe that the material, the debris that I photographed, and the 6 photographs that I took contain pictures of the real stuff. The authentic debris that was brought from Roswell was not a weather balloon, but was the real debris.
There's no question that there's a relationship between the UFO sightings leading up to the crash at Roswell and the crash at Roswell. In the 3 days preceding the crash at Roswell, there were 88 sightings of craft across 24 states, and on July 4th, 1947, the day of the Roswell crash, it's estimated that over 10 million Americans saw flying saucers on that day.
The simplest explanation for the thousands of reports of flying saucers from all over the world is that the planet is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. Most sightings can be explained. It's the ones that can't that matter, and there are loads of those in every large-scale scientific study.
We're told that hundreds of people were connected, either eyewitnesses indirectly or directly, to the Roswell event. Doesn't this make it true? No, it doesn't, actually. First of all, the numbers grow over the decades. More and more people are telling others that they were there when, in fact, if you look into it, they weren't there at all. But the fact is, it doesn't matter how many people say they were there. You have to have more than just eyewitness accounts. You have to have some sort of corroborative evidence, some physical evidence. And until we see that, I'm just going to remain a skeptic.
The mystery of the incident at Roswell appears to be something that will remain unexplained. Still, the puzzle intrigues us and captivates the imagination in new and startling ways. Even as we speak, the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell is offering up to $1 million for the first scientifically verified piece of debris from the 1947 crash of an alien spacecraft. For those who claim to be eyewitnesses to whatever happened at Roswell, the event of July 1947 can never be forgotten. But until someone collects the $1 million or more evidence comes to the surface, what really happened at Roswell will have to remain an encounter with the unexplained.
We all go through life accepting what textbooks told us about the universe. But what happens when questions are raised about many of our fundamental beliefs? A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you've never imagined possible. Encounters with the Unexplained.
One of the most intriguing mysteries of modern UFO research is encountered not in the sky nor in outer space, but tucked away neatly in the Nevada desert.
What is it that lies beyond this boundary that the U.S. government would kill to keep secret? Is there a base hidden away in the desert waste of Nevada where the government actually flies captured UFOs? Do Russian satellite photos reveal the amazing truth our own government won't let us see? Could this man's remarkable story really be true? Did he work on alien spacecraft and help make them fly again? Could the U.S. government actually be working with alien beings in a super-secret desert complex known only as Area 51?
Old geological maps identify this particular piece of real estate simply as Area 51. This designation covers a large area which consists principally of the dried-up bed of an ancient sink, which, for some unfathomable reason, is still called Groom Lake. A super-secret facility located here supposedly operates around the clock, and even though the government silently insists it doesn't exist, it has been seen by hundreds of witnesses and photographed dozens of times. And if the rumors about it are true, this installation is the hiding place for one of the most amazing secrets of this or any other generation. Clearly, there are secrets of some kind in this mysterious complex because, according to official government maps of the region, the entire installation simply does not exist. Why is this desert base such a secret? Is the truth of its purpose related to the continual sightings in the area of UFOs?
After the Lazar story broke, the UFO watchers came here and discovered this land. They came here in four-wheel drives to overlook this secret base.
In a television interview, Robert Lazar claimed that he was employed between 1988 and 1989 at a hidden base even more secret than the Groom Lake installation.
When I went to work, I was flown from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas to Area 51. From Area 51, I was bused to an even more highly secure facility located about 15 miles south of Area 51 called S4. S4 is situated at the base of the Papoose Mountains by the Papoose Dry Lake bed. The S4 installation is built into the mountain and the 9 hangar doors are angled at about 60 degrees. These doors are covered with a sand-textured coating to blend in with the side of the mountain and the desert floor.
According to Bob Lazar, it was in this hidden base that he worked on disc-shaped flying craft that were based on technology given to mankind by beings from another planet.
In other words, not only did I read briefings and not only was I taught the theories of these technologies, but they were demonstrated for me and I know they are true and accurate.
Lazar went on to claim that there are several fully working flying discs at the S4 facility, but only one on which he personally worked.
Because of its sleek appearance, I nicknamed it the Sport Model. The Sport Model is about 16 feet tall and 40 feet in diameter. The center level of this disc also houses the control consoles and seats, both of which were too small and too low to the floor to be functional for adult human beings.
Bob Lazar paints a scenario where the craft has an anti-gravity reactor or a gravity reactor that produces a wave of gravity. If you're inside this craft, it has no seat belts because to you inside the craft, it is always upright at natural gravity.
If the story Lazar tells is true, then this design is no mere fantasy but a reality and proof positive that Earth has been visited by intelligent beings from another planet. Could the U.S. government actually have this kind of technology in its possession and have kept such a secret from the public and press for over 50 years? And if the story has already been told, why is the government still taking such extraordinary measures to try and keep the base hidden? According to this research by the Salt Lake Tribune in September of 1993, Air Force Secretary Sheila Wignall requested control over nearly 4,000 acres of publicly owned land out in the Nevada desert in the Nellis Range complex. Reporter Glenn Campbell devoted several years to breaking down the wall of secrecy around Area 51 and the mysterious base at Groom Lake.
Area 51 is a small block of land that is simply the best known of the secret areas of the Nellis Air Force Range complex. Behind that, we have vast areas of desert. Until the early 1980s, it was actually possible to drive up to the Groom Dry Lake bed and look across and see the base in the distance. It was a secret base, but an open secret. In the mid-1980s, the military seized an entire mountain range, the Groom Mountain Range. At that point, the base became non-existent. It disappeared from USGS maps, and ever since then, the government has refused to refer to the base in any manner or form.
What could be on this installation that would merit such strong measures? Does anyone outside of the base know what kind of work is being done there?
We should all remember that the U-2 spy plane was flying out of Area 51 for many years. The same is true of the Blackbird SR-71 and the stealth fighter. They were all flying for many years before we heard about them.
But will the government use deadly force to simply keep citizens from seeing airplanes take off and land?
Area 51's been a pet project of mine for the last 25 years. Colleagues all around the world feed me information through our website, email, whatever. We do have some pretty interesting information showing that they've not only had alien craft that they've captured and been testing, but they also have equipment they don't even know what it does.
It's fairly obvious that this particular site was chosen because of its isolation, and being part of the Nellis Air Base bombing range doesn't make it all that inviting either. But apparently the isolation or even fear of bombs wasn't enough to keep people away. Just exactly what other measures has the government taken to protect this non-existent base from intruders? Is it the average citizen, the UFO buff, who's the problem? Or are they concerned with enemy spies? And just who is it that is protecting the most widely known secret in the world? Would it surprise you to learn that it's not the government at all? For years now, average citizens, individually, by the van load and by the bus load, have gone considerably out of their way just to get a close-up view of Area 51, only to encounter a scene right out of a third world country. An SUV or helicopter will suddenly appear on the crest of a hill. The message is unmistakable. You are not welcome here.
Come on, let's go. Get it out of here. This photo shoot's over with. Come on. Let's go. Come on. Get in the car. Come on, go.
But given the vast size of the complex, surely they can't be everywhere at once. How can they be sure someone isn't getting past the guards, so to speak?
It has, I'm told, surface-to-air missiles in case planes fly over that aren't welcome there.
And we were pursued dangerously by this helicopter.
If he doesn't respond immediately, another airplane will be scrambled to intercept him and force him out of the area, or he'll be shot down.
The question is fairly asked. Can security measures be taken too far? And what happens when one side or the other crosses the line? Could it be that the UFO craze simply got everyone off on the wrong track? Long before there was a base of any kind around the Groom Lake area, Area 51 was just another useless piece of desert to be used for atomic testing. Is it possible that the guardians of Area 51 just want to protect people from possible exposure to latent radiation? Norio Hayakawa doesn't think so. He's experienced firsthand the aggressive security measures at Area 51.
In 1991, I led an investigative group from Southern California, including some journalists, to this area, and after we witnessed what I believe was some type of a test flight or possibly a maneuvering of these objects in the air, we were pursued by black military helicopter. I was leading a caravan of 7 cars on this dirt road that led to the outside perimeters of Area 51. And suddenly a black military helicopter with no insignia came over and approached our cars, came in front of our cars, almost about 10 to 15 feet above our cars.
But if Norio Hayakawa and other curiosity seekers trespassed on military property, shouldn't they expect to be confronted, even arrested?
At no time were we trespassing the military area. We were well away from the military zone, and we were on public land. We had every right to be on public land, but yet we were harassed by this military helicopter dangerously.
Whatever is happening at Area 51, it seems certain it is not to keep people from wandering into an area where they might be injured or pick up old atomic radiation. It is designed specifically to protect whoever or whatever is inside the complex.
They are ready to use whatever force necessary to keep people away from this area, even outside perimeters.
If that's true, if the guardians of Area 51 will even pursue civilians on public land 10 miles away from the installation, haven't they overlooked the fact that this secret base is still easily visible from the air? Would it not be a simple matter to fly low over the complex and see exactly what kind of work is being done there? Retired Air Force Colonel Wendell Stevens doesn't think so.
The airspace over the Nellis Range is highly restricted. If a pilot happens to stray into one of these restricted areas, he's contacted by radio in the clear and asked to leave. If he continues to fly in this restricted area, he'll be ordered to leave immediately and will be given vectors to leave the area by the shortest route. If he doesn't respond immediately, another airplane will be scrambled to intercept him and force him out of the area, or he'll be shot down.
Even military pilots on exercise here are forbidden to overfly this zone. If they do, it could mean the end of their career. If you, as a civilian pilot, were to fly into Groom Lake, certainly you can lose your pilot's license.
Well, for 40 years, it has been the location of choice for testing black projects. The most secret projects in the world that our military is looking into, that's where they go. I mean, it's perfect for that. It's ringed by mountains. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's adjacent to the nuclear test site. It has, I'm told, surface-to-air missiles in case planes fly over that aren't welcome there. It has motion detectors in the ground. It has ammonia detectors that can sense the smell of ammonia in human skin. It has surveillance cameras to see who's looking down on the base. So it is an extremely secure location.
Of course, these kinds of security measures are not uncommon around top-secret military installations. Could it be that the next generation of high-tech weaponry is currently being tested? Particle beams, high-powered lasers, or space weapons? Or could it be something else entirely? Is there finally some evidence that corroborates Bob Lazar's story? Is the power source that moves alien spacecraft through the cosmos actually in the government's possession?
Many of us have devoted a lot of time and energy to research on what's going on at Area 51. But no question in my mind that a new type of technology is being developed. We have seen aircraft over there at Area 51 above the Groom Mountains that definitely resemble what's known as flying discs or flying saucers.
In the UFO research field, a growing number of experts are making claims that secret government projects at the Groom Lake facility are somehow related to technology brought here from another planet. Whether or not this incredible claim is true, one thing seems certain. Witnesses have seen some kind of aircraft at Groom Lake that appear to be something not made by human designers. Have they actually seen UFOs at Area 51? What about photographs? Videotapes? What are these strange lights in the sky? Are there reliable eyewitness reports of alien spacecraft, even alien beings, at Area 51? The saga of Area 51 neither begins nor ends with the Bob Lazar story. In point of fact, strange sightings in this area of the Nevada desert were being reported before Bob Lazar was even born. But it was the general awareness created by the interview with George Knapp on a Las Vegas TV station that seemed to focus public attention on the area. Prior to that series of interviews, Area 51 was just a designation on old military maps where atomic bombs were touched off, in the interest of national security, of course. But in 1955, all of that changed. In that year, Lockheed desperately needed someplace to test their latest super-secret aircraft, the U-2 spy plane. They turned to one of their chief test pilots, a man by the name of Tony LaVere, to help them find a secluded spot within enough land to accommodate a very long runway. And with that, Area 51 became America's most secret new aircraft testing facility. But what else was going on there? The official U.S. government statement concerning Area 51 reads,
"Neither the Air Force nor the Department of Defense owns or operates any location known as Area 51.
Strictly speaking, that's true. And even though it was built by the CIA and is used exclusively, so far as anyone knows, for government-related projects, it is operated by a private company and guarded by the Wackenhut private security force hired by that company. For over 30 years, except for a couple of ranchers, people generally ignored Rachel, Nevada, and the nearby Groom Lake facility. But there were other things going on that would give Bob Lazar's story instant credibility. A 1950 FBI memo from Agent Guy Hottle reported that he had been told by an Air Force investigator that 3 flying saucers had been recovered in the New Mexico desert. After all, the alien craft Lazar claimed he worked on had to come from someplace. So even before the complex at Area 51 was built, the seeds of one of the nation's most troublesome mysteries were already being planted. Today, hundreds of UFO watchers regularly drive out into the Nevada desert across public land and make their way up to the top of Whiteside Mountain or Freedom Ridge to try and get a glimpse of what they believe to be a captured vehicle from another world.
In one of our expeditions to Area 51, one of our affiliate members succeeded in taking rather remarkable footage of what appears to be a disc-shaped object over Groom Lake itself. It didn't behave like any conventional aircraft I've ever seen, no sound whatsoever. But the remarkable thing is that in other occasions we have seen the zigzag maneuvering of this type of aircraft, sometimes almost a 75-degree turn and sudden descension and ascension.
Could this really be a spacecraft from another planet that fell into human hands?
A consistent story that comes up from a lot of workers is that a craft was brought here around 1953 and that actual live aliens were brought here about that same time.
Well, the Russians have been taking pictures of Area 51 for many years. Stalin had an intense interest in UFOs, and one of the things he wanted to know about was Roswell. And the conclusion they came up with was that Roswell was real, that something really did crash there, that it wasn't a weather balloon, and it wasn't anything of earthly origin. They didn't know exactly where it came from, but they knew it wasn't ours and it wasn't theirs, and this was something that was of monumental importance that needed to be studied.
Of course, to this point, these claims are still just hearsay and rumor without more evidence to support them. Does such proof exist?
All the stories that float around this place are as much a mystery to workers as they are to us.
Do we know where all these stories of captured UFOs originated? And how did these craft get to Area 51?
Folks who run Area 51 won't admit that it exists. There was a federal lawsuit that was just tossed out in which they just wanted to know the name of the base, and they fought it tooth and nail and now don't have to reveal the name of it.
If you work in a secret area like this, like Area 51, your work is highly compartmentalized. You come to work on jets from Las Vegas with the window shades down. Upon arrival at Groom Lake, you are bussed in buses with blacked out windows directly to your workplace. You see nothing more than the hangar or the few buildings that you happen to work in.
That's the interesting dichotomy. The Russians can fly over it and take pictures. In fact, we've signed an open skies treaty that allows dozens of other nations to fly over and take all the pictures they want. But we, the people who put the bills for the place, aren't supposed to know about it.
In 1988, a Russian satellite took a remarkable photograph over Area 51. Notice the object highlighted at the end of the runway. It's positioned at the same position as if it were about to take off.
Recently, several new photographs of Area 51 were released on the internet, perhaps in recognition of the fact that in spite of repeated denials, the public demand for an explanation of the mystery of Area 51 continues to grow every day.
This year we've seen 2 sets of images of Area 51 that were released. The first came from a Russian spy satellite that can see things as small as 6 feet across. The second came from a U.S. commercial satellite, and it can see things as small as 3 feet across. This gives us unprecedented clarity and detail of the activities at Area 51, and this is from a base that the U.S. government claims still does not exist.
The detail in these new satellite photographs is indeed startling, but the images raise more questions. Mainly, what activity? Note that in none of these photographs is there any indication of active personnel. If something is going on there, where is it taking place? Until now, Bob Lazar has been the only eyewitness to come forward and describe any kind of work being done on alien technology in Area 51. However, in an exclusive interview with Encounters with the Unexplained, this man, David Adair, a respected and internationally recognized expert in space technology, agreed to speak out publicly for the first time about his own incredible experience at Area 51.
I built a rocket when I was 17 years old after building many, many rockets to get to this one that I built, and it was about 10 feet tall and it weighed about a ton, and the engine design was somewhat unique. It was an EFMC engine, electromagnetic fusion containment engine. There was a lot of help involved. There was congressional help, there was help from the military, and once we had the thing completed, we took it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and then it was flown from there to White Sands, New Mexico. And then on June 20th, 1971, we launched this missile. The rocket was extremely fast, and it left out of the area, and a man named Arthur Rudolph was there who gave me coordinates to land it at a place called Groom Lake, Nevada. The rocket soft impacts up there with parachutes, and we fly from White Sands to Groom Lake, and when we get there, there are twin 10,000-foot runways, and it's a considerable Air Force base there. Once we land, when we got to the center hangar, we stopped, and then the entire floor of the hangar dropped out from under us, and it was an elevator. And we went down about 200 feet, and when we flushed out with the floor down there, the huge underground facility has a kind of a rainbow type cascade looking roof, and the walls cantered down on the sides, and on each side you have big work bays and workshops and offices. And so we rode past a lot of these workshops, and then we got down a good ways, and then we stopped to a work bay that was on our left, and they got out, and the man opened the doors, and the doors slid back, and we went in this room where there was lights everywhere, but there was no shadows, kind of like a painter's booth. And they had something sitting on a huge metal table, and it was covered up, and they pushed a button, and the cables raised this big cover, and to my surprise, it's another EMFC engine, but it's about the size of a Greyhound bus. My engine and that one worked similarly, but the difference is mine was like a Model T, and this thing was more like a Lamborghini. It's incredibly sophisticated. I knew that this engine, it couldn't have been made in our technology level. This thing, as big as it was, there was no wires, and there was no screws, no rivets, no bolts, no weld lines, no seams, nothing. It looked like the entire thing grew. When you touch the engine, that's where it gets even better. And wherever your skin touches it, these really pretty swirl patterns would radiate from your skin through the hull, the metal, and it would descend out maybe 5-6 feet in all directions. So it was really interesting. It was reacting to touch. I just finally had enough. I knew that this engine didn't belong to them, and it couldn't the way the thing was constructed. We had no capabilities at that time. Even today, we don't have that kind of technology. So I'm really angry. They're angry. They tell me to get down. So I'm coming down off the engine, and everywhere I'm touching the engine, it's no longer the blue-white swirls. It's now fiery red. Looks like orange-red colors shooting through the hull. And after seeing this, as I'm coming down, I stop, and I'm so amazed by this and watching it. As I calmed down, it went back slowly to the bluish white swirls. That's when I realized that this engine, it's alive. It's picking up on not heat radiation, but thought waves. This thing is a symbiotic engine. It's capable of linking with the occupants of a craft.
They've had aircraft, you know, that like saucer-shaped craft that crash into the ground because they don't understand what makes them tick. They're actually using some humans in a telepathic form through like the remote viewing project that they had, which was actually connected with Area 51, so that they could try and figure out how these craft were controlled, because it was all done with thought.
If this sounds too far-fetched, let me bring you to current events. In Princeton University right now, there's a professor there at Peer Labs named Dr. Robert John, who's working with the military on the X-29 fighter. And what he's doing is building a buffer system where the aircraft and the pilot, when he puts his helmet on, has leads stuck to his skull. And as he thinks, the plane reacts. And that is a symbiotic relationship between the pilot and the aircraft. When I finally got down off the engine and I got on the floor and I turned around and looked back at it, I realized that this engine was extraterrestrial in origin. It was outside of our technology of building something like that. And I realized I was standing on top of a huge piece of evidence everybody's looking for. And that made me more angry, because I realized that they were holding back on all this stuff. And no one has the right to do that.
The encounter ended with David being summarily and rudely locked up until General Curtis LeMay, then the commander of the Strategic Air Command, came to personally escort him home.
Well, after LeMay picked me up and we were flying home, he told me that they weren't through with me. They'll be back. He'll try to cover up as much as he can to help me out. But he said they will return in your life.
The general was right. While still in his high school graduation cap and gown, David Adair was personally handed his draft notice. He would spend the next 8 years in the United States Navy. But in the meantime, the young rocket scientist had seen and touched what he still believes is a symbiotic, perhaps even biological engine of extraterrestrial origin. Could it be that the mysterious craft seen over Area 51 were not recovered at UFO crash sites? Is it possible that our government has been working secretly with an alien civilization? Are we on friendly terms with beings from another planetary system? Just in case you're wondering whether America's best-known secret base is still above the law and presumably still up to its neck in secret projects, a presidential determination dated September 25, 1998, should put everyone's mind at ease. In this document, President Clinton exempted the United States Air Force operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada, from any federal, state, interstate, or local hazardous or solid waste laws that might require disclosure of classified information. The letter went on to state that disclosure would be harmful to national security. But from whom are we keeping the nation secure? No one argues the fact that if it's true, Robert Lazar's story that he worked on a full-scale version of this alien craft is probably the most important news story of the last 100 years. And if David Adair's story is true, an even larger and presumably more powerful engine of unknown origin has also been in government possession for at least 30 years. But what about the story behind this supposedly alien technology? How did it come to be in human hands? According to Lazar, during his stay at Area 51, he was given information which, if true, would constitute undeniable proof of intelligent life on other planets. In Lazar's video interview, he claims that while at the super-secret S4 facility, he was shown official briefing documents stating that the beings who gave us the secrets of the flying saucer came from the Zeta Reticuli system, a star system that is 35 light-years from Earth.
The beings are 3 to 4 feet tall and weigh 25 to 50 pounds. They have grayish skin and large heads with almond-shaped wraparound eyes. These beings said that they had been visiting Earth for a long time and presented photographic evidence which they contended was over 10,000 years old. There was an exchange of hardware and information in Central Nevada until 1979, at which time there was a conflict which brought the program to an abrupt halt.
Few made the connection at the time, but Lazar's identification of the Zeta Reticuli system appears to corroborate an amazing story told 20 years earlier by Betty Hill, one of the first UFO abductees.
And while Betty was aboard the ship, she was conscious enough to look around and ask questions. And she saw what appeared to be a star map on the wall on the inside of this ship. And she asked who apparently was the leader of the group what it represented. And he says, well, it's our sector of the universe. Well, Betty remembered that, apparently. It was imprinted in her subconscious. And Betty was able to draw a sketch of what she had seen on that star map inside the ship. No one really knew just what it meant, except that a brilliant young woman, an astronomer by the name of Marjorie Fish, looked at it and said, "I think I can make some sense out of that." And over the course of about 6 years, Marjorie Fish put together what she thought that map that Betty remembered represented. But on that map were a couple of star systems that were not discovered until the late 60s. Once we made those additional discoveries, the Fish map became very valid. And the place that the captain of the ship told Betty that they were from was a star system that we call Zeta Reticuli.
Could Betty Hill have made all of this up? Did Bob Lazar just pull that name out of a hat? Or are we finally seeing some corroborating evidence of alien visitations, even abductions, tied to Area 51?
That Betty and Barney didn't make it up. Because over the years since, that's a tiny part of a vast amount of evidence that these are real events.
But what of this notion that our government and the aliens have cut some sort of deal? Is such a thing even remotely possible?
It is possible that our governments could cut a deal with an alien world in exchange for the technology that we have gained so rapidly and so quickly. We've given them something else, maybe the ability to come and go from this planet and use it like a gas station to go to other planets. Perhaps they're after resources, the water or the minerals in our planet, or possibly even use us as resources.
The theories and possibilities boggle the mind. Government collusion with alien forces, abductions, engines of enormous power, all hidden by the desert sands of Area 51. Is this the secret the government is so anxious to protect at Groom Lake? Is it even remotely possible that Area 51 is being used as a sort of spaceport for alien craft in exchange for technology?
Area 51 could easily be used as a spaceport. Any facility such as that is that's concealed and has boundaries set off and keeps the public away, and also in a remote area like in a desert, you could easily come and go without much problems, especially if your craft are impervious to radar where you can't see it, and possibly even the naked eye couldn't even see it.
Lazar says he witnessed the operation of the ship's power source and that it made use of the enormous energy made possible by antimatter. And according to Lazar, one antimatter weapon could easily destroy all of the Earth's civilizations. Lazar also claims that using this energy as a power source makes this craft impossible to detect.
The disk can't be seen from any vantage point, and for all practical purposes is invisible. All you could see would be the sky surrounding it.
These are fantastic claims, and Bob Lazar has been accused of fabricating much, if not all of it. Is there any reason to believe what he says?
The thing I notice about Bob Lazar when he talks, he's one of the best articulate people in the world of physics. I saw people working down there, so there had to be people working on these projects, and maybe they should take a closer look at what he's saying and really analyze it.
Assuming for the moment that all of this is true, what purpose could the government have in mind for all of this technology? Norio Hayakawa doesn't believe these new advances will be used for the betterment of all humankind.
You can rest assured that this technology, one way or the other, is going to be used for some type of military activity. Well, this could be used for a large-scale, unprecedented type of war we have ever seen.
Norio Hayakawa doesn't believe these new advances will be used for the betterment of all humankind.
These are photos of a secret California facility conducted by Lockheed Corporation. There are several secret air bases in Southern California where they are testing the parts to build some of these this craft objects. And the strange thing about these facilities is that you don't see any aircraft on the runway, no aircraft whatsoever. When this facility was under construction, people near the area have seen rows and rows of cement trucks almost 24 hours a day, continuously, in one cases for several weeks at a time, indicating that a large underground complex was being constructed.
I was fortunate enough to interview people who constructed the underground facility at Area 51. There's research laboratories and things like that under the desert floor, and then the surface was restored to look like it did before.
According to Hayakawa, the security around this facility is as strict as that surrounding Area 51, and the sheer size of each is truly staggering. Even if some secret project of gigantic proportions really is going on underground in California and Nevada, does that mean the technology is being developed for hostile purposes?
To be honest with you, I would not be surprised that some abductees are taken to some U.S. underground facilities. And if that is indeed the case, there again, we're dealing with a criminal case here that involves total violation of our constitutional system.
Can these stories actually be true? UFO abductees brought by force to Area 51. Is there any evidence to support these frightening claims? In Robert Lazar's video, he claims that the S4 facility near Area 51 is hidden inside a mountain with 9 giant hangar doors textured to blend in with surroundings. Incredibly, this matches the description given by some people who claim to have been kidnapped by the occupants of a UFO, then taken to a mysterious underground facility.
Abductees have been taken to places that they have assumed were underground facilities. Abductees have also reported that they have seen what appeared to be U.S. military people involved in their abduction.
And yet there are also those who believe the military is developing this technology for the protection of the human race from an alien invasion.
I don't think the government or the military believes that we face a major threat from anybody on this planet, that our greatest threat literally comes from someplace out of this world.
Others believe the government is only interested in protecting itself.
They started infiltrating UFO organizations. They spied on UFO researchers. They put out false information to muddy the waters. They actively encourage this laughter curtain, a policy of ridicule that anyone who sees a UFO is crazy. Well, anyone who sees a UFO is not crazy. That's just the prism through which we view this now. The government's done a very good job of disinformation, of clouding the whole issue.
All the eyewitnesses that said they've seen things flying at Area 51 is easily explained. They're seeing things that are flying there. Research is going on, and they're flying everything from reverse engineering aircraft to possible extraterrestrial craft coming and going. So these people are not nuts. They are seeing things fly around out there.
It's an underground military presence that is vast. Friends of mine who've been in it have said that it's literally a 40-story building buried underground.
If UFOs are real, the government has perhaps a legitimate interest in avoiding panic and making sure that society does not overreact to this situation. Purportedly, UFOs have been known to the government since the 40s and 50s. During that time, there was a lot of hysteria about communism, about world affairs. If you were to introduce UFOs at that time, perhaps there would be mass hysteria. Perhaps there would be a shaking of the foundations of our society.
They try and cover up stories. They treat the public like it's just not even important. They've got devices sitting in crates that humanity could benefit from. But what do? They sit there and try and figure out how to make a weapon out of it. It's not the right way to go about it. If they want it to evolve, they've got to start sharing some of the information so that everybody can start working on how to advance it and use it.
Bob Lazar is unshakable in his story. In a recent interview, he was quoted as saying,
"I am exactly sure of what I saw. I know what mainstream science is like. I know where physics stands. I know all of that, and this is an extraterrestrial craft. This technology is hundreds and hundreds of years in advance of us, and that's the end of the story.
But those of us who didn't see it firsthand still have to ask, is there any indisputable evidence that alien technology is being tested and used at Area 51? Could it be that locked deep beneath the desert floor, behind the tightest ring of security in our history, there is proof positive of life on other worlds? If that proof is there, it brings up another, even more profound question. Will the world be better off if that startling disclosure is made and the unexplained becomes the unimaginable? The remarkably complex and beautiful configurations known as crop circles, if you'll pardon the pun, may have finally come full circle. Not only have this cryptic phenomena persisted for decades, but the questions now being raised cut to the very heart of the controversy. What exactly is the origin of these amazing formations, and who, or what, is responsible for making them? For more than 3 decades, the world has witnessed the mystery of the crop circle. The often beautiful but always baffling markings have appeared in farmers' fields all over the planet. Dismissed by skeptics as the work of clever tricksters, the enigma of the crop circle has nevertheless endured, buoyed by detailed scientific investigations and bolstered by a growing collection of serious researchers dedicated to discovering their meaning. Is it really possible for the increasingly complex crop circles to be the work of hoaxers? Can these complicated designs be constructed in just a matter of a few hours in complete darkness? Even some former skeptics are now taking seriously the reports of strange lights appearing over the crop fields where circles appear. But are these lights some bizarre naturally occurring phenomenon? Or does there appear to be an intelligent force that directs them? Have recent crop circles revealed a tantalizing glimpse of their origin, and even suggest, as some believe, that we have, in fact, made the long-awaited contact? 2 new chapters of this inquiry have begun to unfold in dramatic fashion. First, an amazing eyewitness account of a crop circle actually being formed. And second, the discovery of 2 crop circles that have a chilling connection to a message beamed into distant space by Earth scientists nearly 30 years ago. The fascinating story behind these latest twists in the crop circle mystery will unfold when we return.
A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you never imagined possible. Extreme Mysteries. Extreme Mysteries.
Even the most serious researchers of crop circles acknowledge that over the years, hoaxers have had their hands in many of the 10,000 total reported crop circles, probably since the days of the earliest discoveries. Is it possible, then, that solid scientific support for the claims of authenticity by crop circle investigators has finally and fully ended the debate?
How many hours it can take an unknown number of hoaxers to create one of the large and elaborate crop circles can be long debated, unless they want to let us in on their secrets. However, what they cannot replicate is some of the chemical and biological abnormalities that we've detected in some of the genuine crop circles. The classic evidence found in the grain of genuine crop circles includes the presence of elongated nodes, expulsion cavities, and germination abnormalities. These represent specific, irrefutable changes at a cellular level that cannot be forged by hoaxers stomping crops with wooden planks. The disbelievers and skeptics have never been able to explain away what science has indisputably and consistently proven.
Another puzzling aspect of the crop circle phenomenon has been the frequent appearance of lights above and near many of the sites. Glowing orbs would sometimes be present, and even more frequently, they would appear in photographs taken at the crop circle locations without having appeared to the naked eye. It is the lights that play an important role in the extraordinary experience of an eyewitness to one of the most remarkable recent crop circle experiences on record. Nancy Talbot is no novice to the world of crop circles. She is a co-founder of BLT, an investigative research team that includes biophysicist William C. Levengood, whose breakthrough scientific testing procedures have set the standard for evaluating plants affected by the crop circle phenomenon. Nancy Talbot's amazing and unique experience occurred during a research trip to Holland in the summer of 2001.
I was there on behalf of Dr. William Roll, the Parapsychological Services Institute, doing some geomagnetic and electromagnetic work at a site where we have a lot of crop circles and an individual who seems to anticipate their coming. I don't know if it's possible for a person to will a crop circle into being. There are many groups who have meditated on particular designs and later found them in the fields. But more interestingly are unconscious thoughts of crop circles where people have either driven by a hillside where there is no crop circle and they get an idea of what they'd like to see there, and the next day when they drive by, there it is.
On August 8th, Nancy went to visit Robert Vanderbroek, who lived near the city of Hoven.
The primary reason to be in southern Holland was to study more closely a young man there, his name is Robert, who for many years now has had dreams of crop circles occurring in his area, a situation which has often resulted in people going to the area, the field which he has seen in this dream, and there in fact will be a new crop circle.
For the first 10 days in Holland, Robert and Nancy visited a number of crop formations which had occurred in the area prior to her arrival. They were gathering the baseline data for Dr. Roll's research. During the nights, they bicycled out to the fields with a night vision camcorder and several flash cameras in order to carry out photographic experiments.
It has been discovered that very unusual light phenomena often appear on these photographs, balls of light, but sometimes flashes or dribs or drabs of light, which we don't think we can explain by any sort of camera malfunction or film glitch. On the night of the 20th, I had been in Holland by about 2 weeks by this time, and we had spent the days with the magnetometers out in the various crop circles that had occurred, taking measurements, and every night until 3 o'clock in the morning doing flash photography or other work in the crop circles. And I was exhausted. Robert wanted to know if we were going out again, and in disgust I pretty much said, no, I'm going up to bed, and did so, leaving Robert down in the kitchen. Once I got upstairs, I pulled these curtains, thin, gauzy curtains in front of the windows, got into my nightgown, and got into bed to read for a while. Within about 3 minutes, I heard an intense, raucous bawling coming from some cows in a nearby barn.
But the cattle soon quieted down, and Nancy went back to her reading.
At about 3:10, the cattle started to bawl again, this time louder, clearly in distress. And I realized again that perhaps I should get up and go to the windows so that I could see whatever this was that was happening. Some intuition kept me in the bed. I didn't get up. I would say that maybe 3 minutes elapsed after that, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this brilliant white, slightly bluish around the edges, tube or column of light descended with enormous force down to the ground. It lit up my bedroom like daytime. The outside was so bright I could see the trees across the field. Then everything went quiet. It was dark. As if nothing had happened at all. I almost wasn't sure I'd seen it. But within another second, another tube, another column of light descended, again with this incredible force, extremely difficult to explain the energy that was involved there, came crashing down to the ground, and again, it lasted for a second or so, and then it went dark. By this time, I was starting to think of Robert, wondering if he was seeing the same thing downstairs, and before I could get out of the bed, a third column came crashing down, almost in exactly the same location. Again, the outside lit up, again, my room lit up. By now, I was yelling for Robert, who was downstairs in the kitchen, watching the same thing, and I could hear him yelling for me about the same event. Everybody immediately went to the windows at the back of the house to look up to see where these lights had come from, you know, what was up there, and there was absolutely nothing.
Nancy and Robert walked to the back of the yard. They were separated from the farmer's field by a fence and a deep irrigation ditch. Just over the fence, about 15 feet into the field, just barely visible in the darkness, was a new crop circle.
Nancy's desire to experience the phenomenon in a more direct way was fulfilled beyond her wildest expectations. But what, in fact, had they just seen? There wasn't a hint as to where the light had come from, yet the tangible, physical result of the effect of the light was just a matter of a few yards away. What would a close-up inspection of the field in daylight reveal? Had they just witnessed the true source of authentic crop circles in action? The surprising answers when we return.
Extreme mysteries.
The thought of sleep was completely gone as Nancy and Robert pointed their flashlights out into the field. There were no hoaxers anywhere about. No students with elaborate plans, no men from the local pub with a board attached to one foot, nothing. The question was, would they find the markers they had come to expect when true crop circles were formed?
I grabbed a flashlight, and as we got to the fence at the back of the house, I turned it on, and when I put it on the field, there, about 10, maybe 15 feet into the field, was a brand new 35-foot ellipse staring at us back from the dark. Half of the leaves were laid in one direction and half were laid in the other, and so we got an odd reflection, but we could clearly see this brand new crop circle in the string bean field. The next morning, when I got up, to my absolute amazement, I could see this brand new crop circle from the bed itself. We got up and immediately went to the circle, where we found a 35-foot long ellipse rather than a circle, off of which to the north went a long pathway and a crossbar like the capital letter T. The bean plants were swept counterclockwise along the northern edge of the ellipse and then laid in one continuous sweep all along the southern edge. The eastern and western edges of the ellipse were slightly squared off, ending in rows of beans on either side, and the standing plants in the rows were completely unaffected.
Examination of the plants showed them all to have been bent over at the base, and no broken or split stems were seen. There was no visible trauma to the stems or leaves or the very healthy-looking beans beneath them.
The night after the crop circle formed, Robert and I and a friend of his went back into the field to take some night flash photography. We had thought we might get some of these orbs or other figures, other light phenomena on the film. Every roll of film that we took that night had photographic anomalies. Some of them were large, semi-transparent orbs that seemed to be some distance away from us and the camera. Others were much smaller, much more dense, and very close to the people who were also in the shots, sometimes directly over their heads, sometimes down low next to the crop surface. Crop circle research involving a study of clay minerals in soils at crop circles indicates the presence, again, of energies which have been suggested by the plant work earlier on. One of the studies proposed now is an attempt to duplicate these energies, or at least some of them. And in talking to microwave and laser experts about setting up these experiments, they have voiced the opinion that the crop circles are probably the result of either military or industrial research that has either gone astray, an accident, so to speak, where the fields then get impacted with the energies, or that they're actually playing with the citizenry by bouncing these energies off of satellites or perhaps from high-flying, high-altitude aircraft. One of the scientists involved in the most recent soil project came to the opinion that we might be looking at a new energy, or an energy unknown to science at this point in time. And one of the most interesting ideas that I've come up with since this experience was the possibility that this energy, or energy complex, is actually interacting with human consciousness. The fact is that not 15 minutes after I had stated the disgust and the frustration over the elusiveness of the phenomenon, the difficulty in studying it, these tubes of light and the circle appeared. Not only did they appear, they did so in the closest field to my location, not more than 90 feet away from me, and entirely visible from the very bed that I was sleeping in.
Nancy Talbot and the hundreds of dedicated researchers like her have already proven the reality of the crop circles to their own satisfaction. But the quest for the origin of these magical, mysterious formations continues and takes us next to Great Britain. There in the countryside of Chilbolton in the summer of 2001, there appeared two astounding crop circles. Could they be, as some researchers believe, nothing less than a message representing contact from an extraterrestrial civilization? Is it possible that they are in fact a scientific reply to a long-distance call sent into space decades ago? Many researchers now believe that's exactly what occurred in the late summer of 2001. But the origins of this astounding celestial connection go back to the year 1974.
This was an amazing and challenging undertaking. Imagine the task trying to formulate a message that you can send via radio telescope that will go out to someone who can't even understand English and even comes from another planet. The message was designed to be sincere, straightforward and non-threatening, a form of simple hello from planet Earth. It was the first message sent with the express intention of communicating with an alien civilization somewhere. Devising this message became a task for a small group of academics at Cornell University, led by Frank Drake and the late Carl Sagan.
The message would be beamed into deep space from a 300-meter dish built into a mountain by the National Science Foundation at Arecibo, Puerto Rico, the most advanced radio telescope of the day. But in facing such a daunting task, just how do you decide what to put into the message, and in what form do you send it?
Early on, the Cornell scientists made two basic assumptions. One, if there was a distant civilization capable of receiving and decoding a basic message, that civilization had to be, at minimum, somewhat scientifically advanced. The second assumption was that if there was anything close to a universal language among scientifically advanced civilizations, it would have to be the language of mathematics. The message devised by Drake and Sagan took the form of a cleverly devised binary sequence. This Morse code-like message had to be easily recognizable by any alien scientist as being a message and not just the random noise of space. The Arecibo message that was eventually sent showed that our numbering system on Earth used a base of 10. This then became the means to deciphering the rest of the message. Another part of the coded message identified the atomic numbers for hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen and phosphorus, these being the most commonly occurring elements on our planet, the building blocks of human existence. Also included in the transmission was the molecular composition of human DNA, along with a depiction of the double helix DNA strand. The radio message also transmitted information about the human race, such as our form, the average height of humans, and also the population of Earth when the message was sent. One of the controversial inclusions in the message was the identification of our solar system as having 9 planets, and that this message was originating on the third planet from our Sun, the star at the centre of this solar system. The problem that some scientists had, along with government and military officials, was that of a security risk, in that if we transmit a message out into space, we don't know who's going to pick it up, be they a friend or a potential foe. Anyone can decode the message and possibly even come to visit. On November the 16th, 1974, the Arecibo message, consisting of 1,679 pulses of binary data, was transmitted into space and took a little under 3 minutes to transmit. This signal was repeated a number of times over the next few days. The message was aimed at what was thought to be our best hunch, a star cluster called M13, which consists of 300,000 stars in the constellation of Hercules. The Arecibo message was later transmitted on several more occasions. Also, a gold-plated plaque displaying a similar message was affixed to Pioneer 10 and 11, the first two NASA scientific spacecraft, whose trajectories would carry them beyond our solar system into unknown space.
The burning question being asked 27 years after the first Arecibo transmission was, have we in fact now received a reply in the form of a crop circle in the English countryside? In the intervening years, crop circles have become increasingly complex and have even contributed to new geometric theorems. Had someone, somewhere out there, received the message and created a response? Not all crop circles are discovered right away, and the fact is they are hardly ever expected to be related, even if they appear in adjoining fields. But all that changed in August of 2001.
Astronomers in the Chilbolton Radio Observatory were looking right out their front windows at what appeared to be binary code laid down in the wheat field. And only 5 days before, on August 14th, they had seen a shadow out in the field, and nobody had looked to see what it was. But by August 20th, with this binary code staring them in the face, so to speak, through the windows of the observatory, phone calls went out, people went up in airplanes, and what they saw startled everyone.
The Chilbolton Radio Telescope Complex was built in 1965, originally funded by Cornell University, the same institution where Carl Sagan and Frank Drake devised the Arecibo message. The facility is situated adjacent to privately owned lands and is surrounded by a high barbed wire fence. The crop markings were easily visible from the Chilbolton complex. It was far from an ideal location for any hoaxers to secretly carry out the making of two complex crop formations during the brief nighttime hours of summer. And what did investigators make of the markings? Was there evidence within the formation that suggested an extraterrestrial origin?
This is what was in the field out in front of the observatory, and this is what astronomers from Cornell University prepared to send out in binary code from the Arecibo Radio Observatory down in Puerto Rico on November 16th, 1974.
A close examination showed that the two code formations were only similar, but not the same. So what were the significant differences of the patterns in the Chilbolton crop formation compared to the 1974 Arecibo transmission concerning the message's planet of origin?
Well, as you come up into where we had a solar system showing our sun over to the third planet is raised up, third planet from the sun, Earth, and we put a little humanoid figure up there and we indicated how high it was and the population. You come over into the photograph of the field in August of 2001, and here's the square for the sun. You come over 2 planets, and the third planet, the fourth planet, the fifth planet are all raised, as we did in our 74 transmission, indicating perhaps that something is saying we have 3 planets inhabited somewhere.
And what about the human figure represented in the original Arecibo code? How has the Chilbolton code responded to that part of the message?
You come to the same position that we indicated a human, and over here it is very odd. If this is a head, it's much, much larger than a human head. And it seems to indicate some kind of arms, a torso, and legs, but with a completely different layout compared to us.
And how do the two codes differ when describing the basic chemical elements on each originating planet?
Where we had the atomic numbers for the 5 basic elements of life, silicon had been added as a 6th element. And of all of the elements that have been hypothesized about, if you had other planets in the universe that had life and they were not carbon-based, what could they be? One of the science fiction subjects has been a silicon-based life form.
Ultimately, there are two overriding questions. Have tricksters with PhD levels of knowledge about cellular biology pushed crop circle hoaxing far beyond previous levels of sophistication? Or have we finally seen the face of alien contact? Meanwhile, the investigation continues into the amazing pair of crop formations found at the beginning of the 21st century near the Chilbolton Observatory. For the ultimate answer, we can only look to the heavens and watch for new messages in the fields.
We all go through life accepting what textbooks told us about the universe. But what happens when questions are raised about many of our fundamental beliefs? A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you've never imagined possible. Encounters with the Unexplained.
On the 9th of December, 1965, hundreds of witnesses in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania saw an unidentified flying object streak through the sky.
But it was the people of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, who not only saw, but actually found what many claim was a vehicle from outer space. The object was clearly seen, not just falling, but appearing to land in the woods nearby. Within 2 hours, armed military forces of the U.S. government literally invaded this small Pennsylvania town, retrieved the object, and hauled it away. What was it that fell or landed near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania? Does the U.S. government now have an authentic UFO in its possession?
For over 35 years, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania has been a town divided by a bizarre controversy. Many of its citizens claim that nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened there, while other residents claim that in December of 1965, this Westmoreland County village was briefly the home of a crashed UFO. What is the truth about this strange metal object that witnesses say crashed in the woods near Kecksburg? And why do some of them say the local people were ordered to keep quiet about what happened?
What you saw out there in that field, it was nothing. Was it because they had stumbled across some top-secret government project? Or because they had seen an object that proved the existence of intelligent life on other planets? To learn the truth, we'll have to go back to that December afternoon in 1965.
It was about 4:47 p.m. when the object apparently impacted in the woods at Kecksburg. There are a number of local residents around Kecksburg who saw the object get down into the wood area. While none of these people reported any type of sound of impact, almost momentarily there was a column of blue smoke that rose up out of the woods.
According to the eyewitness accounts, Kecksburg residents rushed to the spot where they now saw smoke rising through the trees.
By the gulch, I saw a big boom over.
There, they say, they discovered a metallic object partially buried at the bottom of a ravine, still smoking from its long descent through the Earth's atmosphere. Kecksburg resident Jim Romansky says he was one of the first to locate the object at the bottom of a densely wooded ravine.
Here was this large metal object in front of me. I've described it as a large acorn. And the reason I say the acorn is because around the bottom of this object there was a bumper that went the whole way around this thing. It was dented and it had a very distinct color. This thing was a bronze, copper, steel. It was a color that it's very hard even to describe.
Then, according to Romansky and many other witnesses, armed U.S. soldiers began to arrive with trucks and other heavy equipment.
You know, the military started coming in. We were under martial law. Jeeps, trucks everywhere. The MPs were at every corner.
Down through the woods come two guys. Trench coats, crew-cut hair. He looked around, he looked at the object, he looked at us, in a very authoritative voice, told us that this area is now quarantined, it's restricted, to get out.
Okay, guys, let's split it up there.
According to Romansky and many other witnesses interviewed by Stan Gordon, the object only remained in the ravine for a few hours because the soldiers who had so quickly arrived on the scene recovered the object and took it somewhere else.
Here comes this big flatbed truck. The back of this flatbed, they had this big tarp on it, and it was stretched down around this object. And it had the same outline. In fact, I know I could see the bumper under this tarp because you could see the shape of this thing. The tarp was pulled so tight that you could see the shape. And I knew in my mind that was what they brought down off that mountain, the object.
The military truck with the flatbed trailer with the object on it departed late that evening from Kecksburg. And from information we now have, the truck continued on and it went to Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio, where it stayed over for a short period of time. From there, it went over to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. It seems very likely that our government had tracked the object and they had notified the quick response recovery teams that are involved in this type of operation.
Since the object was taken away, and to date at least never seen again, you might think that as far as the residents of Kecksburg were concerned, the incident was over. But according to a number of the eyewitnesses, the most terrifying aspect of their encounter with a UFO had just begun.
John Murphy, who was the news director of WHJB, felt that the story concerning the object at Kecksburg was of great importance. So he did a lot of investigation on the case and interviewed a number of witnesses who had been involved or had knowledge about the incident.
Now, what exactly did you see?
I saw a ship falling from the sky and was burning.
Is that what you saw, ma'am?
Uh-huh. It was in the shape of an acorn, came down out of the sky, and it just landed really smoothly in the woods. It had interesting writing on it, like nothing we've ever seen in this world.
Writing? Are you sure it wasn't like Japanese writing or something that
No,
you haven't
positive.
seen before?
Very different.
You're saying it's a spaceship now, not anything that our
UFO.
government...
Yeah.
Yes.
It was...
Absolutely.
So what is the situation here on the home front and around here with all the soldiers?
We don't know what's happening, so it's very frightening.
According to the witness accounts, Something seems to have badly frightened a good many of those who had seen the unidentified flying object and who had witnessed its recovery by the military.
This is John Murphy. We're going to cut for a quick commercial break. Hello, this is John.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Sally?
Hey, Sally, how are you doing?
Listen, about our interview?
Yes, that was a great interview yesterday. You and your son did a good job.
Well, I know I thought I was short, but I'm not. And I made a big mistake, and you need to not air it.
What?
Well, people make mistakes, and I was wrong.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
And we're back.
It seems as though something must have occurred between the time of the interview with John Murphy and the time that the radio special was to be aired, because of the fact that these people were willing to be interviewed, and then suddenly they decided they didn't want their name or any information aired with this report.
Why? What happened to cause the witnesses to refuse to make their testimony public when they'd been so willing only hours before? Did something of unknown origin land or crash near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, or didn't it? What could bring the military out so quickly and in such numbers to what is still a rural township in the Pennsylvania hills? Is there an official government position on this as yet unexplained event? And if there is, what exactly is it? With a few minor variations, what we have just seen is the story eyewitnesses have been telling about the Kecksburg event for the past 35 years. It seems simple and straightforward enough. A flaming object of some sort came down in the woods. A number of people saw it in the sky. Some went to the site and actually examined it close up. Then military officials came in, scooped it up, and hauled it away. That should have been the end of it. But there are complications. Jim Romansky says that he has maintained for 30 years that the meteor story was the one given to some Kecksburg residents by the military.
To jump in a truck and someone said, hey, what was that up there anyhow? And the guy hollered back, oh, it was a meteorite. And I looked at one guy and we both bust out laughing. We knew it was no meteorite.
But strangely enough, there was a meteor sighting that very night, seen by hundreds of people across the northeastern United States and some parts of Canada. That is a fact that is not in question. But could it have been seen in Kecksburg?
A typical meteorite event is one of the most spectacular things that is fairly commonly observed on the Earth. An object from space plunges into the atmosphere of the Earth, perhaps as fast as 40 miles a second. It pushes the air in front of it. The air pressure builds up and often fragments the object, breaking it into many pieces that looks like a shower of Roman candle as the pieces then disappear. And the fireball can be very bright, so bright it can be seen in broad daylight as a brilliant thing in the sky, or so bright that it can light the whole night sky almost like day.
Could this have been what the area residents in and around Kecksburg actually saw?
I was working on my car, Corvair, out in the driveway, and I heard this sizzling noise, and I couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't sound like an airplane. And I looked up in the sky, and coming from the north, I'd say northwest, and headed east-southeast, and it looked like a big fireball. It was up there about, I'd say 2 or 3 miles, maybe better than that. And I watched it, and it seemed like it was headed for the mountain. So I went out on the road right out here, and I watched it, and it seemed like it couldn't make up its mind what it wanted to do, just like if it was radio controlled. It made like a figure 8, and it come back in, I'd say, almost into Kecksburg, and it just went down. It just disappeared.
There are two things that you can guarantee with almost every fireball event. One is that it's interpreted in the experience of the viewer, so there'll be a lot of different interpretations. And secondly is that there'll be a lot of misimpressions, a lot of confusion, and that the people who believe they know where it landed are really very far away from where the event occurred.
And I figured, well, I'm going to go up and look. So I figured, well, I'll go up there where I used to go hunting and set up on top of the hill, and you can overlook Kecksburg down in the valley, and that would be a good spot to find something. So I went up, and I looked down in the woods, upper part of the woods there at the edge, and you could see this arcing, and just looked like somebody welding or something. So I went down, got my flashlight, went down and crossed the creek, and I went up, and there it was. I says, I couldn't figure out what it was. And it looked like an acorn, but the front end of it was dug down in the ground about 2 or 3 feet, and there was no windows in it. There was no rivet marks or nothing. It just laid there, and it was like arcing, and you could smell like some kind of a acid or something like that, a burn or something. And I figured, well, it couldn't be an airplane. It couldn't be a meteorite, because meteorite, I understand, whenever they come down with a bang. They come straight down. And this couldn't have been a meteor. And like people says, it must have been a meteor. I said, no, it wasn't a meteor. I said, there was something that I'd never seen before.
Bill Bulebush was just one of the eyewitnesses to get within 15 to 20 feet of the object. He and other witnesses described it as about the size of a Volkswagen, but plainly visible. Could they be describing a meteorite?
If you had a meteorite the size of a Volkswagen surviving to the Earth's surface, it's going to be going at a velocity of 4 or 5 miles per second. It's going to make a crater in the soil, and it'll do shockwave excavation. It'll make a crater maybe 4 to 10 times its own diameter, depending on its velocity. And at the end of that, if it has not disrupted, it will burrow out at the bottom of the crater and make a little tunnel and come to rest at the end of that tunnel.
Obviously, what eyewitnesses say they saw in the woods that night was not the object meteorologists would describe as a meteorite. Yet the very fact that there was a meteor seen in the area that night has added confusion to the controversy.
The evidence that the object was a meteor is overwhelming. It was well documented by sightings and photographs taken widely apart in different parts of the country. The fact that it was seen from such widely separated areas demonstrates that it was something very high in the sky, which fits naturally the description of a bolide or a fireball. Also, it was traveling at the appropriate speed, about 32,000 miles per hour. And astronomers estimated that, plus they even have a photograph of a smoke trail. So it's well documented that it was a meteor.
On December 9th, 1965, 4:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a meteorite entered the atmosphere south of Detroit, headed out over Ontario, south of Windsor, Ontario, and any fragments would have landed in the area south and east of Windsor, Ontario. It would have been seen over a much wider area, however. It could have been seen in the Kecksburg area, but there's no question it could not have landed there. It was headed in the wrong direction.
Yet there also seems to be little question that the military did move into Kecksburg very quickly and with considerable purpose and manpower.
So we went back up, and I say in an hour, maybe hour and 20, 30 minutes, something like that. And you couldn't get near the place. I says cars and people and everything. So we finally worked our way up into where I had the car parked before. And my kid couldn't get over. The Army was down in there, the trucks. And the Army, they had like a fence around there that you weren't allowed in there. And that was it.
It seems unlikely that the U.S. military would take such extreme measures to protect a meteorite. Yet some witnesses today insist they were threatened. Others claim nothing at all happened.
I think these people knew that something had come down, and the military presence was so strong that night that a lot of people who the military knew, seen something or lived real close to it, was either told to be quiet or were bought out or something.
You guys listen up. What you saw out there
It was nothing. Don't say anything to anyone. Not your mom, not your dad, or anyone.
But remember, John Murphy, news director of the local radio station, was already interviewing witnesses for a special news program he called Object in the Woods. Suddenly, he ran into a stone wall. Could there be more to this part of the story than meets the eye? There are those who believe John Murphy may have been an eyewitness himself.
He told me that something had landed in the woods. He didn't know what, but he was going down there. When he came back up, at some point there, military had come in. The state police were there. He couldn't get back down. They took the film out of his camera. I believe he still had some in his pocket that they didn't get, they didn't find. He had his tape recorder with him.
From all accounts, John Murphy was an aggressive professional newsman. Could it be that he actually got photographs of the object?
I know John had pictures of the object. He told me he did. He wouldn't lie about that. It's too good a story to pass up.
But unfortunately, John Murphy never got to tell his story.
We received other calls early tonight from some other people who said they had changed their minds now at the last minute and did not want the statements they had made over this past weekend used on this radio program tonight. One person said that they was afraid of the state police, and another person said they did not want to get in trouble with the Army.
A week or two after that, after they had censored, or the program had to be so censored, that he clammed up all of a sudden himself. Wouldn't talk about it. Somebody had to have gotten to him, because it was very unlike John to just drop something.
John apparently let the matter drop for several years, but a few weeks after giving Stan Gordon a copy of the complete, uncut tape that he never got on the air, John Murphy was killed in a bizarre hit and run near Santa Barbara, California.
As I read on the police report, he was looking at, or crossing the road to look at, the oil slicks up in Santa Barbara at 10 o'clock at night. Why would he cross a road at 10 o'clock at night to see an oil slick? The whole thing didn't make sense. It's like, somebody want to shut him up?
We may never know. Even the tape given to Stan Gordon has mysteriously disappeared. All of that notwithstanding, the official government position even today is that what actually came down in Kecksburg was a meteor. A flaming object that made a controlled landing. A metallic shape without joints or seams. Strange markings unlike anything on Earth. Rapid military deployment. If all these clues are based on fact, do they indeed add up to some kind of spacecraft from another world? Or is there some other possibility that might excite that level of government interest? It is not disputed that the military gathered up and hauled something away from Kecksburg that night. We can safely assume it wasn't a meteorite, so what was it? Clifford Stone, a former military NCO involved with UFO investigations, believes he knows.
I believe the United States government has the crash remains of several UFO crashes as well as debris of several other UFOs, to include the object that was recovered from Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. My basis for this belief is on what I have observed and what I have been involved in for 22 and a half years serving this great nation of ours.
The government, of course, has not owned up to any such thing, and the mystery took on a new and surprising twist when reports of a secret Russian satellite suddenly began to surface. Now, there was another possible scapegoat. If the meteor thing didn't hold up, maybe the episode at Kecksburg could be fallout from a failed Russian space launch. A satisfactory explanation for what landed at Kecksburg still eludes serious researchers. Could it be there was something going on at that time the government wasn't willing to share with the public? If so, what's the point in keeping it a secret today? What was Cosmos 96, and how did it get to be entangled with the events of Kecksburg? Setting aside the idea of a meteor for the moment, there seems to be just two possibilities for what came out of the sky near Kecksburg in 1965. Either it was part of a top-secret American or Soviet satellite project, or it was some sort of vehicle that no one is willing or capable of describing.
Remember that by 1965, both the United States and the Soviet Union had the capability of putting nuclear weapons in orbit, and each was desperate to learn about the technology of the other. These rockets had segments that were jettisoned in flight and that fell back toward the Earth, presumably to burn up on re-entry. This practice has continued to the present day, and we now know that sometimes large parts of these space vehicles do not burn up entirely. Occasionally, a rather large fragment will actually reach the ground intact.
There has been a treaty on the books for many years that launching countries had in regard to the fact that if something of foreign origin would fall on our soil, we would recover it and make them aware of this and give it back to the launching country.
Remember that the American military would have been very interested in recovering a Soviet probe such as Cosmos 96. It would have told a great deal about Russian military expertise at that time, particularly if there was any reason to believe that the object was part of a Soviet weapons system equipped with nuclear missiles.
December 9th, 1965, seems to have been a particularly exciting day for things falling out of the sky. The fact is, a Soviet Venus probe launched the previous November did come crashing to Earth on that particular date. The question is, could it have come down near Kecksburg?
Weapon-bearing satellite systems are not designed to make soft landings. If indeed the object that came down in Kecksburg that day was a part of such a weapon system, it first of all would not have made a soft landing, and secondly, most likely there would have been massive destruction in that area.
It was launched on November 23, 1965, but its booster failed before it could be sent on its way to the second planet.
It has indeed been verified from the U.S. Space Command and the Naval Surveillance Center that Cosmos 96 did indeed re-enter the Earth's atmosphere at about 3:18 a.m. on the same morning of the Kecksburg incident, and that occurred in Canada. Cosmos 96 was a Venus probe, and there are in fact similarities in the general shape of the two.
There was a tiny bit of resemblance, but that's where it stopped. I mean, the Venus probe, you had seams, you had pieces sticking out.
If the object at Kecksburg was a failed Soviet probe of some kind, could this explain the strange hieroglyphics seen on the object by several witnesses?
The external markings or identification markings that we have seen on many of the Soviet probes at the time would look very unusual to people who are not familiar with the Russian language or the type of lettering. And in fact, if the object had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, there could have been some scarring and burning, and they could have looked somewhat distorted from the re-entry.
My dad is originally from Kiev. And I went to him one time and I said, Dad, I says, you could read and write Polish and Russian. He says, yeah. I said, write me something in both dialects. He says, what? I said, just write me anything. And he wrote a few things, and I looked at it, and I turned it upside down. I even held it up and I looked backwards to it. Even the Polish and Russian writing that I seen doesn't come nowhere near it.
The simple fact that Cosmos 96 fell to Earth on the very same day as the Kecksburg incident seems to be sufficient evidence for many people that they were one and the same. But perhaps we shouldn't make up our minds just yet.
I mean, the Venus probe, you had seams, you had pieces sticking out. It was that quick that I could look at the picture and say, it wasn't it. Because I've been a machinist for almost 30 years now. And I've cut a lot of metal, different kinds of metal. And I've never run into it again, never.
So what does that leave us with? Where does the evidence point?
We have to look at the possibility that one, that the object in question may have been man-made, possibly Soviet in origin, or this could have been an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
For 35 years, the object that landed at Kecksburg has been the subject of heated controversy. And there are reasons to believe that the fallen Russian space probe, Cosmos 96, could have been the object seen by so many that December day in 1965. Particularly since we know that Cosmos 96 did crash on that day. But we must still consider several other important facts about that particular space probe.
What witnesses describe, of course, is the fact that the object moved slow enough that some people could actually see what looked like individual flames coming from the object. But according to what eyewitnesses describe, those who did get close to it, they describe an object that looked to have been a one-piece type of unit.
Still, without the object itself, there is no final proof. Is it possible that it still might be held in some military storage facility somewhere? There have been attempts to trace its whereabouts, and until now, the search has come to a dead end. Clifford Stone, a former military NCO who served on several bases where UFOs were the subject of investigation, believes he may have seen the Kecksburg object.
I was fortunate enough to have a friend at Lockburn Air Force Base where the object from Kecksburg, Pennsylvania was brought. He was able to get me into the Air Force Base, and from my vantage point within his automobile, I was able to see the object as it left the hangar. After the flatbed got a little distance from the hangar, I started to hear a high-pitched whimpering sound like that of a high-speed generator. At the same time, I noticed there was blue light emanating from underneath the tarpaulin that covered the object. As the sound got louder, the light seemed to intensify.
I think, first of all, we can rule out the fact that the incident is a hoax. Something did occur there that night that created a lot of activity, and the fact that the military apparently responded in the way they did indicated the fact that this was something that was important to our government and military. I think we can eliminate the possibility that this was an airplane crash, because initially this is what a lot of the different agencies thought may have occurred. After we eliminate all the possibilities we have as to what the object may have been, we have to look at the fact that this may have indeed been either what may have been a highly advanced Soviet space probe, or in fact we might be dealing with an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
How can we learn the real truth about what landed in Kecksburg in 1965? Is it possible that we are in fact on a wild goose chase, that we're trying to find out about something that never really happened? Many local residents agree that something fell to the earth at Kecksburg, but there are those who claim government soldiers did not hurry to the scene or retrieve anything from the woods. The official explanation of a meteorite doesn't appear to hold up. Can it be that Cosmos 96 is the answer? Many of the Kecksburg witnesses are still alive today. Has their memory of those events changed? Is there any evidence that the government hasn't given us the real facts?
I know what I saw.
With a 30-year-old debate still dividing the citizens of Kecksburg, is there any way for us to really know the truth about what landed there in 1965? It's true, we still don't have the object itself to examine, but is it possible to learn the truth by a process of elimination? What happens if we simply eliminate those arguments that don't fit the facts? Recently, our research team went back to Kecksburg to interview some of the principal witnesses and investigators once again in order to bring you the very latest information on the still puzzling events of December 9th, 1965.
Apparently, whatever this object may have been, apparently it was of great interest to our intelligence community. Whether or not that they were aware that something of a foreign nature had been launched and had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and may have come down in the area, or whether indeed that they had indication this was something much more unusual. Apparently it's something they wanted to get to very quickly and wanted to get out there to recover and study. Those people who saw the object go down said it was going down very slowly as if controlled. And what we now know is the fact that several individuals apparently went down into the woods and came across this large metallic acorn-shaped object down in this ravine. So we actually have eyewitness testimony, the people seeing this object coming in, apparently making some turns, coming down very slowly, and in fact that there is a solid metallic object down in the woods. The official government response is that people had seen only a bright meteor in the sky. The only official government document we found that pertains to the Kecksburg event is from the Air Force Project Blue Book report, and it indicates that a search was conducted in the woods till about 2 a.m., but nothing was found.
That report would seem to be at odds with a number of witnesses who have indicated over the years that a large military contingent came in quickly and took over the town. In an earlier interview, Jim Romansky told us the military not only arrived quickly, but immediately took over the central building in town for their own purposes.
And as we approached the fire hall, I mean, man, you'd have thought there was an invasion going on. I mean, there were jeeps and cars and trucks parked all over the place, all military.
Soldier assistant agent. I know what I saw. Get these people out of here right now.
And there were uniforms everywhere. And as we tried to approach the door to go back into the fire hall, there was 2 armed sentries or guards, whatever you want to call them, standing there. It reminded me of some of the war pictures I've seen where these people, military people, come in and declare martial law.
In a more recent interview, we asked Jim Romansky if he could remember anything else about his encounter with the military that night.
We had no knowledge that the military was even there whenever we discovered the object. We did our preliminary search and we were standing around waiting for someone to tell us what to do. And we had been there probably about 15 minutes. When down through the woods, here comes these 2 gentlemen, as I often called. One was carrying a little square box, ramrod stiff, long trench coats, no hats, no markings on the trench coats or anything. They come in, they looked around, they said, all right, you're ordered to leave this area, it's now quarantined. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, military. Well, we started leaving. We hadn't gone to more than 10 or 15 feet. And down through the woods, here comes military. I mean, full-blown uniforms, insignia, carrying all kind of equipment. We passed probably 5 to 10 feet away from each other. So as far as I was concerned, I did my job, did what I was supposed to do. What they were going to do now, that was their business, not mine. I got out. It was dark, it was cold, it was wet, and I wanted to get back to where it was warm.
But would a meteorite be something that would attract that kind of attention from the government?
It would seem very unlikely that the military would respond to a report of a meteorite falling in Pennsylvania. Historically, if there's such an account of a meteorite fall, this is something that normally attracts the attention of universities or the scientific community. But from the reports we had from civilians of armed military personnel arriving out at the scene, it would seem very unusual that they would respond to such a fall.
The eyewitness testimony and the scientific analysis appears to confirm that there was a meteor visible over a wide area of the Northeast on the night of December 9th, 1965. But that same evidence suggests it could not possibly have been a meteorite that landed at Kecksburg. Could it then have been the much-discussed Soviet Venus probe, Cosmos 96, which is known to have fallen out of orbit on that same date? First, let's consider the eyewitness testimony.
The object that crashed into Kecksburg in 1965 was a very large metallic object that had no seams in it, no windows, no portholes, no wings, no motors that I seen, nothing protruding from it.
I've seen pictures of Russian satellites, and this thing looked similar to it. It looked like the same shape and everything. It didn't have no solar panels on it or antennas, and this in here was like smooth.
These descriptions certainly don't sound like any Soviet or American space probe for that matter. But eyewitnesses can be unreliable. Are there other reasons to doubt the Cosmos 96 theory?
The Soviets reported that their Cosmos 96 space probe re-entered the atmosphere 13 hours earlier than the Kecksburg incident. So that would pretty much rule out that being what landed.
There has been some discussion that what fell at Kecksburg may have been Cosmos 96. Now, we have known for many years that a Soviet Venus probe, which was designated as Cosmos 96, did re-enter the Earth's atmosphere at 3:18 a.m. in Canada on that same day. The incident that happened down here in Pennsylvania occurred about 4:47 p.m. that afternoon. Now, from what we understand, we've never seen any recovery reports on Cosmos 96, but we are told that it did re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in Canada that morning. Now, over the years, of course, there has been re-entry of space debris, and sometimes some materials left, other times they burn up in the atmosphere. But witnesses tell us that the object at Kecksburg appeared to be a large, solid, metallic object that was in very, very good condition. Except for trees knocked down, they were able to see the object that was not buried.
We definitely know it wasn't Cosmos 96. First, both us and the Soviet Union knows exactly where Cosmos 96 crashed. Their technology may not be the state-of-the-art of ours, but it works just as effectively. So we know it crashed in northern Canada. Secondly, international law requires that the country that recovers fallen space debris return it to the launch authority, that being the country that sent it up there. Third, there has not been a protest issued by the Soviet Union protesting are recovering their Cosmos 96, and this would be a tremendous technical powerhouse for us because it represented the state-of-the-art they had at that time. And finally, if it truly was Cosmos 96, by now there would be an abundant paper trail showing that it was Cosmos 96 that we had recovered. What makes this such a great mystery, there is a total lack of that type of paperwork which would have to exist if it were not for one thing. We are lying and covering up the truth of that event as it is being explained to the American people.
So the time, the location of the Cosmos 96 recovery, and all of the usual international follow-up of a known space event are incompatible with what witnesses and investigators report knowing about the Kecksburg event. But if it wasn't a meteorite, and it wasn't the Soviet space probe, what in or out of this world was it?
During my tenure in military service, I was called upon on many occasions to be involved with UFO-related events. It was during one such event that I was at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. During that time, I saw a document entitled Operation Blue Fly Report 314. This document talked about many aspects, technical aspects of the UFO phenomena that we knew at that time. It also made mention of several UFO crashes. Among the crashes that was mentioned was a place called Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. In that report, it states and makes it clear that what crashed on the night of December 9th, 1965 was not an object that originated on this planet. It was, in fact, an object of extraterrestrial origin.
Could it be that after all these years of searching, that there is an official government report that provides the answer? What is the government's reaction to all of this?
Over the years, I have approached some of our local representatives about the possibility of doing an investigation on the Kecksburg event. And while some of these people have been very helpful in trying to find some documentation, I think some of these people are very reluctant to get into an actual investigation or a probe into the event because of the political issues involved.
It is difficult to imagine that the military would take the time and effort to rush in and haul away a meteorite. And it's just as difficult to think the Russians would identify Canada as the place Cosmos 96 came down if, in fact, it had landed anywhere in the U.S. And it's even harder to imagine that all the witnesses could fabricate the same story about the same event without someone getting their wires crossed. If my memory serves me correctly, it was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who had his famous detective Sherlock Holmes say something like this: "When all rational possibilities have been exhausted, whatever remains, no matter how unbelievable, must be the truth."